Hi, Steve Hansen with VSTOtips.com. This video is how do I create a StateMachine workflow for Microsoft SharePoint. Unlike creating a sequential workflow, a StateMachine workflow is a workflow that models a process where the state of an object or a task varies among known alternatives, but not necessarily along a linear path. So what I'm going to do is create a new project. I'll create it in Visual Basic, go into the Office node, and a SharePoint 2007 StateMachine workflow. I'm going to choose that template. Go ahead and click OK. And just like as in a sequential workflow, there's just a few steps when you launch this template to do. Just can provide a name for the workflow, the site that I want to use for debugging. Go ahead and click Next. The library that I want to associate my workflow with, I'll keep it at Documents, the history list, and then the task list. Also, I'm going to leave the automatically associate workflow checked. So this means when I press F5 to debug, Visual Studio is going to go ahead and deploy this workflow to the document library I've got specified in my library or list. I'm going to go ahead and have the workflow be started manually or when an item is created. And when the design surface comes up, it's a little bit different than the sequential workflow. So here I'm going to do basically a document review workflow. So one way to do a document review workflow is in a sequential workflow. However, you could also do a document workflow using a StateMachine. The reason a StateMachine might be better is because as document approval workflows get a little more complex, a document can move between a review and an in progress. It could also go to multiple reviewers, and you never really know at what point a document is going to go next. If it's in review, it could move on to custom review or to completed. Likewise, if it's in review, it may need many changes, in which case it's going to go back to the author. That author will need to make those changes, and then it'll need to go into the review cycle again. That could occur over and over. So thinking about a document review workflow from that perspective, our primary states are in progress, review, and complete. There's of course many more you can do, but for a simple workflow here, those will be the ones I'm going to focus on. So to design this workflow, I'm going to go ahead and just drag some states that my document can assume onto the design surface. So by default, there's always going to be an initial state. So I'll just go ahead and call that initial state. And then another state that my document could take will be in progress. Another state will be review. And then I'll have my final state be finished. So for a StateMachine workflow, one of the things you need to do is designate an initial state, which I can do by right-clicking and then choosing the Set as Initial State option, and then a final state, so set as completed state. For the initial state, notice there's an event-driven activity within this initial state. I'm going to go ahead and double-click on that, and it takes me to a new view of the workflow. So notice up in the top left-hand corner here, I've got kind of a breadcrumb of where I'm at in my workflow. So right now I'm in the initial state, and then the activities associated with this initial state. So at this point it looks like a sequential workflow, and I can drag and drop activities onto the things that should occur with my initial state. So in the initial state here, all I'm going to do is move from initial state directly into in progress. To do that, under Windows Workflow, there's a Set State activity. I'm going to drag that onto the surface. And then for the target state name, choose one of the states that the workflow should move into next. So I'm going to have it move into the in progress state. So then I'll click back up on Workflow to get back to my main view of the workflow. Notice that Visual Studio has automatically drawn a line between my initial state and my state in progress. So for my state in progress, I'd like to do a couple of things. First, I'd like to create a task to assign to someone for them to finish the document. If I right-click on the in progress state, one of the options here is add state initialization. So this is code that runs, or activities that occur whenever a state is entered or whenever you're transitioned into the state from another state. So next I'm going to rename this state in progress initialization. And what I'd like to do here is create a task. So under the SharePoint workflow items, I'm going to use the create task activity and drag and drop it in there. And just like with sequential workflows, I need to make sure I keep my correlation tokens in sync. So I want to associate a correlation token with each type of state. So to create a new correlation token here, because notice if I click the drop down, so far I've only got a workflow token. I'll just go ahead and create a new token, and I'll just call it in progress token. And then for the owner activity, I'd like that to be state in progress. So for my task properties, one of the things I'll need to do is create a new task ID. There we go. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a new member name, create task 1, task ID, and create a field. I'm going to do the same thing with task properties. And then go into the method invoking property and double click to generate an event handler. In this method invoking event handler, what I want to do is set the GUID for my task ID. So I got create task 1 task ID, and I'm going to set that equal to a new GUID. Next, I need to set the task properties associated with the task. So I'm going to set the title, then set who it's assigned to, and then set the due date. So now I'm going to go back to the design surface, go back to the root of my workflow. Now when the in progress state is entered, that task will get created. The next thing I need to do is set up an event handler to watch that task so I can determine when the state needs to transition into another state. So to do that, I'm going to right click on the in progress state and choose the add event driven option. And so now I get a new event driven activity. From here I'm going to drag and drop the on task changed item into the surface, and then set the properties associated with on task change. I want to set my task ID equal to the task that I created earlier, which is the create task 1 task ID. And then for the after properties and before properties, I'm going to go ahead and create a new field for this. And then set the correlation token equal to my in progress token. Now I'm going to generate the event handler. And in this event handler, I'm just going to make sure that my before and after properties are in sync with the on task changed object. After I've done that, I'm going to go ahead, and what I'd like to do here is see when the task changed, is see if the task has been completed or not. So I'm going to add an if-else activity, and to do that I need to add a code condition in one of the branches. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and create the procedure that's going to determine whether or not the task has been completed or not. And to do this, I'm just going to look at the after properties associated with the onTask changed, and then look at the % complete field. If it equals 1.0, which is 100%, then I'll go ahead and return true. Otherwise, false. So I can now go back to the design surface, and if my if-else branch activity 1, I can set that condition to be a code condition, and then set the condition to be ready for review. So if it is ready for review, I'd like to transition into the review state. So I'll go ahead and drag the set state activity under that branch, and then set the target state name to state review. So if the task is not completed yet, it's something less than 100%, then it's going to enter my if-else branch activity 2, and since I don't have anything in there, nothing's going to happen. It's going to stay in my in-progress state. Once again, notice that since I used my set state activity, and I associate that set state with state review, Visual Studio has drawn another arrow showing me that that event can transition into a state of review. So to handle the state review, I'm going to do it much the same as the state in progress. First of all, I'm going to add a state initialization activity. And in here I'm going to add a create task, much like I did earlier. Except this time I'm going to create a task and assign it to someone to make sure they review the document. For the correlation token here, I need to create a new correlation token for my review state. Once again, I need to create a field for task ID and for task properties. Next, I'm going to generate an event handler for the method invoking. In the create review task method invoking the event handler here, I need to go ahead and create my new GUID for my task ID. And then set the properties associated with my task. So I'll set the title, set who it's assigned to, and then set the due date. Now I'll go back to the design surface and back into the state review state. Right click on it and choose Add Event Driven. Here I'd like to look at the onTask changed activity. And for that I want to set the correlation token. set my task ID equal to the task ID I just created. Then for after properties and before properties, I'm going to go ahead and bind to a new member and create a new field. Next, I'll go ahead and generate an event handler. And then here, I'm going to make sure my before and after properties stay in sync. Then the final thing to do is determine if the state needs to transition into another state. To do this, I'm going to use an if-else activity. And what I need to do is look at the percent complete of the onTaskChange2 after properties. So I'm going to go back into the code here, add a procedure. And then I'll look at the onTaskChange2 after properties and the percent complete. And if it equals 1.0 or 100%, I'll return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return false. The other thing I'm going to need to do is not only look at the percent complete, but also see if the document has been approved or not. So if the document's been approved, that means the document's finished. I want to transition into the finished state. If the document has not been approved, then I want to send the document back to the in progress state. So in order to need to do that, I'm going to need to nest an if-else activity inside my initial if-else activity. Before I do that, I'll just go ahead and set my code condition. And I'll use the condition review finished. And then inside the if-else branch activity 3, I'm going to drag another if-else activity. And for this one, going to simplify things a little bit, and rather than have another field that I'll look at to see if it's approved or not, I'm just going to use the built-in description field. And if the value in that field is approved, then I'll consider the document approved. So go back onto the design surface and add another code condition. Set the condition to equal to doc approved. And if the doc is approved, I'm going to set the state to finished. If the document is not approved, I'm going to kick it back up into in progress. So at this point, my workflow is complete. I'll go ahead and debug it. The nice thing about Visual Studio here is it deploys the workflow out to the document library or out to SharePoint and then associates it with the document library. So go ahead and upload a new document. So it says my SharePoint workflow is in progress. I'm going to open up another tab and browse to the task list. And refresh, and notice I get my finished document task here. So if I'm Willis Johnson, go out and edit the item, and I'll go ahead and say 100% complete. Click OK. So this should trigger the state to move from in progress to review and generate my new task. So now I've got a new task to review the document assigned to Klaus. So at this point, Klaus would go in, review the document, come out to his task, and do one of two things. He may say, okay, I've completed the reviewing the document, and keep in mind here that all I did to indicate whether or not the document was approved is I'm going to look for the value approved in this description field. So I'm not going to put anything in there. Let's say I've reviewed it, but it's not approved. I'll go ahead and click OK. This should move it back into the in progress state. So if I refresh, I should get a new task now for Willis. All the other tasks have been complete. This is a brand new task that Willis needs to go in and make changes to the document. So he'd go in, fix the document, mark the task as complete. This would set the state back into the review state. So this time I'm going to go in and I'm going to mark the review as 100% complete, and I'm also going to approve the document. So now when I click OK, I can see that all of the tasks are completed. If I switch back over to the documents and refresh, I can see that the workflow has completed. That concludes this video on how to create a StateMachine workflow for SharePoint. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.